And here we go with day 3 of Advent of Code 2023. So the problem's called gear ratios. Quite a challenging day 3, I think. And once again, I'm not going to read the problem. Here is a sample input. What we need to do is find all numbers that are attached to a symbol. So 461 is attached to this star. Okay, it's attached diagonally. 114 is not attached to any symbol. Every other number here is attached to a symbol. So 35 is attached to the star, 633 to that hash, 617 to that star, and so on. All right, and then you've just got to find all numbers that are attached to a symbol and add them up. And so for our sample, we're expecting an answer of 4,361. I haven't input my answer yet. So you're going to see that, and I haven't read part 2. So we're looking at regular expressions. I looked through the regular expressions cheat sheet, and I didn't actually, like, the thing that I really need in this is not really detailed here, and so I went to the actual Python documentation. So we've used find all in the past. We're going to use something called find iter before, because it returns a match object, and that gives us more details about what it finds. So all this will make a bit more sense later. So you can see there's a lot of things that you can call in the regular expression library. Okay, so we'll get into it. Now I have worked through this already, and the approach I'm going to show was not my first thought or even my second thought. So it's a little bit developed, and so you're not really going to see it done completely from scratch so much. It'll be a bit polished. If I did it completely from scratch, the video would probably be too long. I'd like to make mention of another video on YouTube. If you look from memory, the user's name is Hyperneutrino, and that person did a video about this same problem using Python. Their approach is probably more simple than mine, but my focus here is on using regular expressions. Okay, so to start with, I've got the code that reads the input. So if I just read the test input, and if I run this, then you can see that rows contains all of the lines. The width and height, I want to just sort of store them. So the width that's the length of the first row, and the height is the length of rows itself. So you can see here that if I type here length of rows is 10, that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 lines there. So that's my height. And the width is the length of the first rows, right? So rows 0 is that line, and that line is 10 long. So I've got a 10 by 10 thing here. So I'm just storing them in nice succinct variables in case I need them, which I almost certainly will. I've put sample data here just so I can easily look at it. I'm not going to use this, but I've just got it here so I can look at it. Okay, now I saw, I've watched at least snippets of a couple of videos that do this problem after I did it myself, and they focused on the symbols. I'm going to focus on the numbers. So they focused on finding the symbols and then looking around the symbol to see if they find a digit, and if they find a digit, then finding out what number the digit is part of. It's quite fiddly. I don't think that's very elegant. I'm not judging, but yeah, I prefer to find the numbers. So I'm going to find every number and record information about what the number is and where it is, and then we'll go through each of those and we'll look around the number to see if we find a symbol. Now, so we're going to find all of the numbers. So I've got a function called numbers where you pass in the rows, and it will return. So for the sample data above, for every number that it finds, it returns this tuple. So that word there, tuple, is just like, a double would be something with 2 values, or a pair. A triple would be something with three values. The general word is tuple or tuple. I'm not sure how people pronounce it. And so that's just a nice way of putting some related values together. Okay, so see this 467, right? This tuple would have 467. That means it's in row 0, starting at column 0 and finishing at column 2. So there's column 0, right? There's column 2. So it's recording what the number is, what row you'll find it on, and what columns it spans, right? So 114 is here. That's on row 0, spanning columns 5 to 7. Right, that 633 is in row 2, spanning columns 6 to 8. So this function is going to go through all of this, right, and it's going to yield all of these things. It's not going to return a list. It's going to yield them all one at a time, which gives us the opportunity to go through them. Okay, so what we're going to do is, well, first of all, I'm going to create a regular expression that will look for digits. So I'm compiling a regular expression, and it's just \d for digit, and then plus, meaning one or more of those. That's all. Okay, and so now we're given multiple rows, so we have to go through all of them. And I could say for row in rows, okay, and I can do whatever I want there. And I could I can scan the row for numbers, right? That's what I want to do. However, see how I'm going to store what row it is? So I need to keep track of what number row I'm on. Not just the text of the row, I need to keep track of what number row I'm on. And so let me just demonstrate here. If I say, row equals that previous value I've got, so here's row, it's just a string. If I type enumerate row, then that gives me an enumerate object. And what does that contain? It contains a group of pairs that has the index and the value, right? The index, the value. So, index 5 has value 1, index 6 has value 1, index 7 has value 4, index 8 has value dot, and so on. Right, there you go. 1, 1, 4 dot. So I can enumerate the rows, and that will give me the index and the row. So I'll call that I and row. And now I need to scan the row for numbers, right? I'll leave that column there at least for now, and I'll say for m in, I'm going to explain before I do anything. So so I say parse so that this is valid code. I can run it again. So digits, that's just a regular expression, and let's say row equals rows 0. Okay, so I'm going to scan this for digits. So you've seen before that I can do re.findAll, and I can say digits and say row, and that gives me the two numbers. But what it's not giving me is where they are. And for this particular problem, I need to know where they are. And I can find that, but I can't use findAll for that. I need to use something else. So let's use a more basic regular expression method, and that's search. So if I search for digits in this text, then it gives me back something more complicated, and it's a match object. And it has the match, which is 467, but it also tells me where it is. The span is 0 to 3. That is, in the row, 0, 1, 2, and then typically in Python, it doesn't include the last thing, right? That's true in a range and so on. So we can read this as going from 0 to 2. Now, problem is it only gave me the first one. So how do I get both of them? Well, I can go re.findIter and go digits and the row. Now that gives an iterator object that we can't really make sense of that, but if I pour that into a list, underscore means just give the previous value. So if I take the previous value and pour it into a list, you can see I get two match objects, one for 467 and one for 114. Right, there they are. 467 with a span of 0 to 2 and 114 with a span of 5 to 7, positions 5, 6 and 7. So there we go. I can say for M for match, in digits, and then, well, I can go re dot find iter digits, and then I'm looking in the row, right? And for now, I'm just going to say print M. Okay, so I can now actually call this numbers row. So I'm going to recompile, refresh my my code, and I'm going to actually, so remember I've got rows here, and I've got a function called numbers, and I'm going to call numbers on rows, and it's going to print the match. It's going to print every match that it finds, and there we are. It's printing every match. So we've found every number in there, and we know where it is on the row, and we know what row it is because I can okay, if I rerun that, there we go. It tells us what row it's on. So row 0, 0, 2, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So all I need to do now is take the information and do what I want with it. So instead of printing it, I'm going to say, right, so the number itself is the integer version of the match. Now, I should maybe, okay, yeah, I need to actually show more before I do anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to return M, and that'll just return the first match that we find. Okay, and then it'll get out of the loop. So this is meant to return lots of things or yield lots of things, but just while we're mucking around, the first thing it finds is going to return, which will stop the function. Okay, so I can go numbers rows, and it gives me a match. I'm going to just store that in. All right, so here's M. Now what can I do with it? Well, I can, if I go M and then index 0, that gives me the actual thing that it found. It seems a bit weird to ask it like this, but if I'd used some brackets to do grouping in my regular expressions, then I'd 1 would be the first bracket, 2 would be the second bracket, and so on. So 0 just means give me the whole match. Okay, now what about the span? If I go m dot span bracket bracket, then that gives me the 0 and 3. Okay, and I do want them separately, so what I can do is m start and m end. Right, so with that in mind, rather than return it, now let's actually operate on it. So we'll go number equals int version, an integer translation of m0, the match that it found. The row number is I, that's from here. The column 1 is the m dot start, so that's where it starts, and column 2 is m dot end, but I'm going to subtract 1 because I want it to be inclusive rather than exclusive. Right, so I've got all my values that I want, and now I'm just going to yield all of them. Okay, so I didn't need this row num. I could have just put yield I in here, but I think it's nice and clear to have a line of code that spells out exactly what it is we're yielding, even at the expense of one more line of code or one more variable. So that is the complete version of numbers. So yield the data for each match in a tuple. Okay, so let's test that. So if I go numbers rows, then I get a generator, but if I pour that into a list, then you get to see all of the tuples coming out. All right, and so for instance, that 598 is down here, right? Oops, at 598, it's on row 9, spanning columns 5 to 7. So that's pretty cool. So now I'll skip over this next bit, and let's say, what would solve look like? So solve would actually, I'm going to write a complete solve. Everything I write now won't need to be touched. So total, basically we're going to go through all the numbers, and if they're attached to a symbol, then we're going to add them up. So I'm going to start with a total of 0, and I'm going to say for dot 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 in numbers and parse in rows. Okay, but remember, numbers rows yields 4 things. So I'm going to put 4 things here so we get them all. So we get the number, we get the row R, we get the column 1, and we get the column 2. All right, so now what? Well, if I said total plus equals num, and then return total, then that would add up all of the numbers. Okay, so I could actually literally run this now. Okay, so I can run this now and type solve 1, and then I get 4,533, right? Now, if I look back at the problem, it's supposed to be 4361, and I got 4533. Yeah, so I'm too much because I've included all of the numbers, but we shouldn't be including this one. What if I do that minus 114? Yeah, 4419. Okay, is there another one here that's not connected? Yes, the 58 is not connected. Oh, and the 592. Okay, so I'll go that minus 58 minus... No, it might be only that. 4361. There we go. All right, so there are 2 that are not connected. All right, so anyway, I'm on the right track, but here I am unconditionally adding them, but I need to conditionally add them. So if attached to symbol, right, now we don't quote the number, we just say what we need is the row R and the column 1 and the column 2. So it's going to look inside our rows to find if this particular set of locations is attached to a symbol. And if it is, then it's going to add it up, right? So what I can do here, I've got attached to symbol defined here, and I've got a comment, but for now, let's just say return true, and now everything will run as before. Solve 1, okay? So this is legit code. It's calling that function, but the function's just returning true, which means that this is just always true. So this is always being executed, but now we need to work on this. So what comment have I written here? Given 268, so row, column 1, column 2, which corresponds to 633 in the sample data. So here, search around that area for any symbol. We would look at columns 5 to 9, okay, because the columns where the number is are 6, 7, and 8. We want to look at columns 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We want to look on that line, and that line, and that line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a string that contains those 15 characters, right? Just one string that contains those 15 characters, and then I can search that string for any kind of symbol. Okay, so any character that is not a dot or a digit would return true. So we would look at columns 5 to 9 of rows 1, 2, and 3. Now, if we were looking here, we're on row 0. So we would look at rows -1, 0, and 1. But there is no row -1, so we've got to handle that. And if we were looking here, then we can't look to the left of it. So we just have to be aware of those things. Okay, I'm going to handle those situations as elegantly as I can. All right, so this attached to symbol is somewhat the heart of what we're doing, right? So let's see. I need to I need to look around, right? So look at positions C1, C1 minus 1 to C2 plus 1 in rows R minus 1, R, and R plus 1. That's what we're going to do, right? So how do we express that in code? Well, I can say now I'd like to say R for row, but we've already used the letter R, so I'm going to say for X in R minus 1, R plus 1, R and R plus 1. And if, let's say if we need this to be valid, so if 0 is less than or equal to X is less than the height, right? So that's what constitutes a valid thing, okay? So now, if it does, then we're going to look at the position, right? So how do I put this? I'm going to say print get chars x C1 minus 1 and C2 plus 1. So get chars is a function I need to write because I need to be careful I don't look too far to the left or the right. So I'm going to write get chars here. Well, I can write it outside the function. If I write it outside the function, it means I can test it outside the function, which is good. Okay, so here I'm going to assume, actually I won't assume R is valid, so I'm going to say if 0 less than or equal to R less than the height, and then if it's not, then I'm going to return an empty string. Right, so if we have a valid row, then I'm going to say if I'd need to, if I get a negative, if I've got a negative C1, I need to make it 0. So if C1 is less than 0, then I'm going to say C1 equals 0. And if C2 is greater than or equal to the width, then C2 equals the width. Now I could have used things like min and max there, but okay. So I'm doing something called clamping here. I'm clamping the values into a legitimate range. So I make sure that the leftmost one can't be negative and the rightmost one can't be outside the range. Our width of our test data is 10, but the indices are 0 up to 9, so we can't have a value that's actually 10. Although, no, yeah, okay, all right. So should I change this? Well, let's see if we get any bugs. Anyway, I've now got a valid row and I've now got valid columns. So all I need to do is say return the rows. So rows, row R, and then what I need to do a slice. So C1 up to C2. Now C2, let me just demonstrate something here for you. So rows 0, let's say row equals that. If I do a slice, like if I go 0 up to 2, you might expect to see 4, 6, 7, but you only see 4, 6 because, yeah, it doesn't include the last one. So if I did, let's say, row 5 to 10, then that would give me all the way up to the end. You can see there are 2 dots at the end. It's giving me all the way up to the end, even though 10's not a valid thing. If I put 11, interestingly, I expected to get an error saying out of range, but it just silently ignores it. So it looks like I don't even need this. So I might just get rid of that, okay? And but if I do have to be careful on the left, because if I go -1 up to 3, then it just gives me an empty string. Okay, I don't really know why. I don't know why it ignores out of range on one and not at the other, but I suppose that's because row -1 by itself gives you the last thing in the... Okay, that's just a useful Python thing, right? If you give it a negative index, it looks from the right end. Okay, so get chars here. So I should be able to refresh this and test get chars. So if I go get chars, let's say row 0 and then 0 up to 2, then it's doing 46. Okay, right, so I want to go, and for my get chars, right, I want R equals row number and C1, C2 equals column numbers, and I'm going to just make the point that it's inclusive, but when I use this slicing technique, it's exclusive at that end, so I'm just going to do a +1, run this again, get chars 0, 0, 2, there we go. And so when I've got like, well, let's just check here, right? So 4, 6, 7, so if I do get chars go pass it -1 to 3, because I want to go 1 to the left and 1 to the right, then that's gives me, yeah, so it's like 1 to the left, which it ignores, plus the 1 to the right, which is the dot, and that's good. What if I give it a -1? Then it gives me an empty string, and that's good. And if I then give it a +1 here, then we'll get that. Okay, and so what I want is to build a string that contains the empty string, and then that, and then that. Okay, now I can demonstrate something here for you. So if I sort of do these in order, so the -1 is the first one, so I call that A, and then the and then I'll go to 0, and I'll call that B, and then I'll go the 1, and I'll call that C, right? So I've got A, B, and C, and I want them all in one string. Well, I can go A plus B plus C, right? Or I can put them in a list like that, right? But I don't want them in a list, but if they're in a list, then I can join them. So I can go, I'm going to just point out, okay, so that's joining them with a separator like I've shown, but if I make it an empty separator, then I get what I want, right? So in my code here, I'm going to say, right, so get chars is working nicely. Now I need to use it. I guess I can run this, so attached to symbol, and if I give it 0, 0, and 2, then it gives me, it's printing the get chars, so it's ignored the first, one because I've got this check, but now get chars has that same check, so I'm going to get rid of this and just call it and get the empty string back. So if I refresh, and there we go. So I get an empty string, and then that, and then that. And I want to put them all in one string. So I don't want to print this now. I want to put them all in one string. So how will I do that? I'm going to, actually, you know what? I'm going to make this, I'm going to do this like I'm going to do this a less complex way for beginners, and then I'll show the more elegant way. Okay, so I'm going to do it kind of more in the way that I showed you before. So A equals get chars, and we want to go row -1. Okay, and B and C, and then this can be row +0, and then row +1. +0 is not necessary, of course, but it just shows what's going on. And so that's got them separately, and then the combined, I'll just say chars around equals A plus B plus C. Right, so, and then for now, I'm just going to return chars around. Okay, let's refresh this. Let's run that, and I get that, right? So if I call numbers rows here, right, so if I take like the 755, if I look up here, the 755 is in position 768. So if I go attached to symbol 768, right, then these are all of the characters around, and it contains that which we'll be able to find, which means that it will definitely will pick up that it's attached. Okay, so if I all right, so the chars around is that, and now okay, so I'm going to say build a combined string called chars around, and now here we will use a regular expression to detect any symbols in chars around. Okay, so I'm going to do a find all here, but let's practice on here. So I'm going to say string equals, yeah, so here's my string. I'm going to do re.findAll string. Now, what am I going to put in the regular expression? Thing about the symbols is I don't know what symbols are included. So, you know, I could put, now, I'm just going to show you here. If I put a star, this will give me an error, because star actually means a repeating character. Okay, so if I put a 5 star, then you can see that it picks up the 5, 5. But it's also, because I've done a find all, it's also found everything else, because the star means 0 or more, and plus means 1 or more. So it only finds one of them. Okay, so star is when something's optional. If I want to actually find a star, I better put a backslash, and there we go. It found the star, right? But I don't know what all of the symbols are. So what I'm going to do is search for anything that's either a dot or a digit. Okay, and that's found loads of things, right? That's either a dot or a digit, but you know from a previous video that putting things in square brackets means it'll find anything that's inside. But if I put a shift 6 here, a caret, it's called C-A-R-A-T, or E-T, anyway, then that negates it. So it means, can you find anything that is not a dot or a digit? And it found the star. There we go. And if it had been a different symbol, of course, it would have found that. Okay, so this is how I'm going to this is how I'm going to play this, right? So there's my code, and I can say symbols equals that. All right, and if the symbols is empty, then there were none. And like we want to know, is it attached to symbol? So we return true or false. Well, this will do the trick. If the length of the symbols is greater than 1, then it means that there was at least one symbol there. So we are attached to a symbol. So there we go. So we've got this completely written now. The attached to symbol is going to work, and I'll be able to like test it myself. So attached to symbol 002. Okay, so something failed. expected string or bytes-like object. Oh, silly me. I've put str, whereas I needed to put chars around. That's the perils of copy and paste coding. Whenever you paste, you should be extra careful. So that says false. Is it false? No, it should be true. It should be picking that up. I wonder why. Okay, so I'm just going to put in print. I'm going to put C1, C2, and chars around here. So this is going to print a bunch of things. Well, actually, in this case, if I just run it once, it'll just print one thing. Look at that. So the chars around contains that, but I'm getting a false answer. Right. What would be... So, well, let's do print symbols. Oh, silly me. The length of the symbols is equal to 1. I need it to be greater than 0. You probably saw that already. Sort of mistake I would not make if I wasn't trying to talk at the same time. Okay, so we can get rid of these things, but it's good. You get to see how you can use print statements to try and to see what's going on, right? Okay, so attached a symbol there is true, and this one will be false, so that's in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So if I go attached a symbol 0, 5, and 7, then that's false, okay? Because it's looked there and it's looked around and it didn't find anything that's not a dot or a digit. Okay, so we're now ready to run this. I can literally just run solve1 because nothing here needs to change. Right, the key thing was making sure this works carefully. So there are two parts to this. There's the numbers where we get all the information we need, and then there's the this where we use the information that we've got. Okay, so I go solve 1, and that gives me 4361. Excellent, that's the correct answer for the sample. If I now look at the real data, which is here, you know, very, very large, 140 lines. Looks like it's probably 140 by 140. This is not the sort of data you'd like to try to solve by hand, that's for sure. And I run this, and I go solve 1. Right, 540212. Let me put that in and see if 540212, enter, and that's the right answer. Brilliant. And now we continue to part 2, which I haven't seen yet. Okay, so part 2. All right, it's got a bunch of information. I'm going to just read it to myself. Okay, right, interesting. Okay, so now we're not just looking at just any symbol, we're looking only for this symbol, the star, and it has to be attached to exactly 2 part numbers. So here you can see the 467 and the 35 are attached to that. Okay, so the gear ratio is the product of them. What else have we got here? Here's a 617 that's attached to a star, but there's nothing else attached to it. And then we've got a star here that's got a 598 and a 755 attached to it. So that one counts. And so, right, so that product is that. And then you get the sum of the 2 gear ratios and you get that. Okay, so straight away I can see that focusing on the symbols instead of focusing on the numbers is a better approach here once we know what part 2 is. I'm happy with my approach for part 1, grabbing the numbers and then looking around them. But knowing about the numbers and not knowing about the symbols per se is not a good basis for me to do part 2. So I'm not going to continue that in this video because it's probably going to take me a while and I might have to like redo a fair bit. But yeah, so if you do solve this in a way that focuses on symbols and then looks for numbers around them, then part 2 is a lot easier because you now just narrow your focus to that symbol and ignore all others, and you can count how many numbers are around and check that it's exactly 2. So I think I will like do some work on this, but not in this video. Okay, so hope you learnt something from that. There may be another one, I don't know, I haven't even read problem 4 and I might have run out of time to do any more of these. All right, see you later.